It started as an ordinary evening, the kind of night that drifts along quietly, with nothing to suggest that anything out of the ordinary is about to happen. She had walked the familiar path before, the same streets she had taken countless times, the same route that always felt safe. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain from earlier in the day, and the dim streetlights cast long, soft shadows that seemed harmless. She moved at a steady pace, headphones in, music keeping her company, her mind wandering through the mundane thoughts of the day, emails she needed to send, errands she had to run, a fleeting worry about an unfinished task at work. The world around her felt predictable, manageable, normal. But normal has a fragile quality, and sometimes it shatters in a single moment, without warning. As she continued down the path, she noticed something almost instinctively, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that her brain couldn't immediately categorize. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of thing that goes unnoticed by most people, but something in her gut tightened, a flicker of unease. The night seemed a little too quiet, the shadows a little too heavy. She passed the familiar corner store, the place she had walked past dozens of times, and this time, the lights seemed dimmer, the windows more opaque. She shook off the feeling, telling herself it was nothing, that she was imagining things. She had done this walk 100 times. Nothing bad had ever happened before. Why would it happen now? But then the shift became undeniable. Footsteps echoed behind her, slow, deliberate, following her rhythm. She quickened her pace, glancing over her shoulder, but saw nothing at first. The sense of being watched, of being stalked, tightened around her chest like a vice. Her heartbeat accelerated, but she tried to keep it under control, telling herself to stay calm, to stay rational. She told herself that maybe it was just someone heading in the same direction, maybe it was nothing. Yet the instinctive warning would not be ignored, a primal alarm signaling danger, the kind that modern life often teaches us to suppress, but that deep down knows the truth before the mind admits it. Then, without any real time to prepare, the world tilted. There was movement in the shadows, a figure stepping forward with a predatory confidence that made the danger real in an instant. She felt a surge of panic, a wave that hit her body and mind simultaneously. The safe world she had trusted, the familiar routine that had always protected her, evaporated in a heartbeat. The attackers didn't hesitate. They advanced with a calculated menace, their eyes locked, their intentions unmistakable. Her pulse spiked. The small, rational part of her mind tried to search for escape, for logic, for any way to make sense of this terrifying intrusion into her life. The ordinary street, the quiet night, became a cage. Every familiar landmark, the corner store, the lamppost, the cracked sidewalk, transformed into potential threats, obstacles, and dead ends. Fear coursed through her, sharp and immediate, demanding reaction before thought could even form. Her body instinctively recoiled, muscles tensing, preparing to run, to resist, to survive. The mental calculations raced faster than her breath. Left turn, right turn, streetlights, shadows, windows, doors, any possibility for safety. Her mind screamed for the world to remain predictable, to hold onto some shred of normalcy, but the night had betrayed her. She could feel their presence closing in, the weight of their intent pressing down on her, making each step feel heavier than the last. At that moment, the difference between ordinary and catastrophic was measured in seconds. One misstep, one pause, and everything could have been lost. Her senses sharpened, every sound, every flicker of movement registering with unnerving clarity. The cool night air no longer brought calm. It carried a sense of urgency, of threat, of imminent danger. Her body knew she was in trouble before her mind could even comprehend the full scale of it. She felt the cold rush of adrenaline, the kind that makes time slow and sharpens perception. Every instinct, honed over a lifetime, was screaming at her. This is not safe. This is not normal. This is not something you can ignore. They moved with the kind of confidence that comes from believing the world owes them something, the kind of arrogance that makes them think consequences are for other people. Every step they took was calculated, yet careless in the way only someone who has convinced themselves of invincibility can afford to be. Their eyes were sharp, scanning, sizing up, reading the situation like a predator analyzing prey. To them, this was not a person. It was an opportunity, a challenge, a test of dominance they were certain they would pass. They didn't think about morality or fear. They thought about control, about power, about the thrill that comes from taking something that isn't theirs. The sense of entitlement draped over them like armor, blinding them to caution, to subtle signs, to the instincts of the person they were approaching. Their movements were synchronized in a way that suggested prior planning, or at least experience. There was a rhythm to the way they approached, a silent understanding between them that this was their moment. They had no hesitation, no second-guessing. Every glance, every step, every slight change in posture communicated assurance, a belief that they were untouchable, that no one would interfere, that no law would stop them. They thrived on this illusion of power, and it made them bold, reckless, and dangerous. It was a confidence rooted not in skill or honor, but in the assumption that consequences were for other people, for people weaker than them, for people they didn't have to respect. They watched her, analyzing her reactions, almost like a chess player studying an opponent who doesn't yet understand the game. When she flinched, when her eyes widened, when she hesitated or glanced over her shoulder, it fed them. It confirmed their expectations, fueled their arrogance, and emboldened them further. To them, fear was not a warning. It was a signal, a confirmation that they were in control, that the balance of power had shifted entirely in their favor. Every subtle sign of vulnerability reinforced their belief that they could act without restraint, without accountability. It was intoxicating, the way control can feel when wielded over someone completely defenseless. They underestimated the world outside their own bubble, the possibility that someone might be prepared, that someone might intervene, that the universe might not bend to their will. In their minds, the night was theirs, the streets theirs, and the rules of morality were negotiable, irrelevant, easily dismissed. They carried themselves like predators accustomed to dominance, their body language radiating authority, confidence, and menace. Even small gestures, a hand brushing back hair, a step closer, a tightening grip, were calculated to intimidate, to assert, to communicate without words the truth of what they believed. They were in charge, and she had no say in the matter. Their thoughts were a tangle of assumptions and justifications. Each rationalization was designed to silence any whisper of doubt. She shouldn't be out alone. She shouldn't have walked this way. She provoked nothing. They were entitled. They were strong. They were in control. Every step, every motion, every glance reinforced this internal narrative, giving them courage that bordered on arrogance, bravery that came not from honor, but from the belief that nothing would stop them. The world, in their mind, was a canvas for their impulses, and the rules that governed it were obstacles to be bypassed or ignored. There was also an element of anticipation, of thrill, that ran alongside their arrogance. It wasn't just about control. It was about proving themselves, testing limits, and asserting superiority in a way that felt urgent and vital to their sense of identity. Their minds raced ahead, imagining the outcome they believed was inevitable. Each second stretched longer as they approached, and every heartbeat of the person in front of them became a pulse in their own narrative of dominance. They mistook fear for weakness, hesitation for surrender, and in doing so, they blinded themselves to the reality that the world does not always yield to arrogance. They didn't hear the subtle warning signs. They didn't notice the tightening of her stance, the way her eyes darted, the almost imperceptible preparation of a body ready to resist. Their confidence was a bubble, and inside that bubble, no obstacle seemed capable of challenging their plans. They were convinced of their inevitability, intoxicated by the sense of control, lulled into a dangerous rhythm by their own assumptions. And yet, in this overconfidence lay a vulnerability they could not see, a blind spot that would soon shatter everything they thought they knew about power, dominance, and consequences. Her body responded before her mind could even catch up. The moment she realized the danger, a cold, sharp wave of fear swept through her, settling in her stomach, tightening her chest, and making her hands tremble ever so slightly. Her heart raced with a rhythm that felt too loud, too insistent, like it was trying to escape her own body. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape, to do anything that might put distance between her and the threat. But fear has a strange way of paralyzing the mind, even as it propels the body into action. She felt rooted in place for just a fraction of a second, a fraction long enough to make every second afterward feel heavier, sharper, more immediate. She became hyper-aware of everything around her. The way the streetlights cast shadows that seemed to move and twist, the subtle echoes of footsteps behind her, the distant hum of a car engine that suddenly sounded too close. Every sound was amplified, every movement exaggerated. Her senses were on high alert, scanning for escape routes, for potential help, for anything that could offer even the smallest measure of safety. Her eyes flicked to alleys, to doorways, to the spaces between buildings, her mind racing through options that felt both urgent and impossible. In that moment, the ordinary cityscape had transformed into a labyrinth of danger, each familiar landmark suddenly uncertain, threatening. The vulnerability she felt was visceral. It wasn't just about being physically small or unarmed. It was the sudden realization that the world could shift beneath her feet in an instant, that safety was not guaranteed, and that there were people who existed only to take advantage of someone like her. The feeling was raw and uncompromising, a deep and gnawing fear that struck at the core of her sense of self. Her breath came in shallow, rapid bursts, her mind jumping from one potential scenario to the next, imagining the worst, calculating every possible outcome. Every option seemed flawed, every escape route risky, every second stretching endlessly as she tried to find a way out of a situation she hadn't prepared for, couldn't have anticipated. Her vulnerability was not just physical, it was emotional, psychological. The awareness of being singled out, of being a target, left her feeling exposed in a way that words can barely capture. She had walked these streets countless times, felt safe in her routine, trusted the predictability of her world. And yet, in an instant, all of that trust was shattered. The illusion of safety evaporated, leaving behind a raw, unfiltered fear that made every step feel heavier, every shadow more menacing. Her mind grappled with disbelief even as it processed terror. How could this happen to her? How could a normal night, a familiar path, transform into a moment where she was at the mercy of strangers with no regard for her life or dignity? Her body reacted instinctively, muscles tensing, ready to run or fight. But there was also the gnawing weight of helplessness. Fear forced her to confront the fragility of her situation, to recognize that in this moment, she was at the mercy of forces beyond her control. That recognition sparked a deeper, almost primal response. Her senses sharpened, her attention narrowed, and her mind became a battlefield of competing thoughts: fear, self-preservation, panic, and the desperate search for any sign of rescue or escape. The world seemed to shrink, focused entirely on the immediate threat, the people approaching, the possibility of harm that lurked in every movement they made. She noticed every detail about them, almost unwillingly, as if her survival depended on it. The way they moved, the expressions on their faces, the confidence in their steps, each subtle sign of their intent pressed into her consciousness. Her fear grew not only from the threat itself, but from the realization that they were deliberate, purposeful, and convinced of their control. Every second reinforced the imbalance, made her vulnerability more tangible, more terrifying. She could feel the tension in her limbs, the tightness in her throat, the flutter of her stomach that comes from being trapped between instinct and circumstance. Even as her body trembled and her mind raced, there was a strange clarity that came with vulnerability. Fear stripped away distractions, leaving only what was essential: survival. Every choice, every movement, every breath became a calculation, a silent negotiation between instinct and reason. Her vulnerability, stark and undeniable, demanded action, demanded awareness, demanded a readiness that she had never experienced before. It was a raw, unfiltered confrontation with the fragility of safety, the unpredictability of the world, and the stark reality that, for some moments, control belongs entirely to others. The moment he realized what was happening, there was no hesitation, no calculation beyond what had already been drilled into him over countless hours of training. His mind moved faster than thought, faster than instinct, faster than fear itself, translating danger into action with precision honed over years of preparation. Every muscle, every fiber of his body, was ready. The world seemed to narrow to a single point: the threat in front of him, the urgent need to stop it, the imperative to protect someone who had no way to defend herself. There was no room for doubt, no space for error, no time to second-guess the right course of action. His eyes locked onto the situation with laser focus. He analyzed the attackers in a heartbeat, their positions, their stance, the way their weight shifted, the subtle signs of intent that only someone trained to read body language could notice. He didn't just see them, he understood them in an instant, recognizing patterns, predicting movements, anticipating reactions. Years of preparation had taught him that danger rarely announces itself clearly. It lurks in the small details, in the micro-expressions, in the moments when hesitation or overconfidence betrays someone's plan. He absorbed every detail and let his training translate observation into immediate action. Without a word, without hesitation, he moved. There was a fluidity to his response, a combination of speed and control that seemed almost unnatural to anyone untrained in the craft. His body was a weapon, but not recklessly so. Every movement was deliberate, precise, and efficient. He closed the distance between himself and the threat with purpose, aware that the longer he waited, the greater the danger. There was no room for theatrics, no time for hesitation, only execution, only the immediate translation of skill into results. He used the environment to his advantage without thinking about it consciously. A lamppost, a curb, a narrow alleyway. Everything became a tool, a shield, or a position of leverage. His mind constantly calculated angles, distances, and possibilities, while his body carried out the plan without conscious thought. The attackers, confident moments before, began to realize too late that the balance of power had shifted. They had assumed control, assumed dominance, assumed that nothing could stop them, and in that assumption lay their vulnerability. His presence alone disrupted their rhythm, their coordination, their sense of inevitability. The moment of confrontation arrived with startling immediacy. His movements were decisive, leaving no room for error. He neutralized their advantage before they could fully grasp what was happening. Every strike, every step, every gesture was a combination of aggression and strategy, honed by years of rigorous training and real-world experience. The attackers, who had approached with arrogance and entitlement, now faced a force that operated on a completely different level, a force that did not waver, did not panic, and did not underestimate the danger. They were forced to react, and reacting under pressure is a vulnerability no one can escape entirely. Even in the midst of the chaos, he maintained situational awareness. His focus was not only on stopping the immediate threat, but also on ensuring that the woman he was protecting remained out of harm's way. Every movement considered her position, her safety, her possible escape. This was not mindless aggression. It was calculated intervention, a combination of protection and precision that transformed fear into control. He understood that timing, positioning, and decisiveness were everything. A fraction of a second too early or too late could change the outcome entirely, and he allowed nothing to distract him from executing flawlessly. The attackers, once confident and aggressive, began to falter. Their movements became hurried, defensive, uncertain. The advantage that had seemed absolute moments before evaporated in the face of someone who had trained to confront danger and neutralize it with expertise. Every instinct they had relied on, every expectation of dominance, was shattered in an instant. The SEAL's presence was overwhelming, a combination of skill, confidence, and sheer decisiveness that left no room for resistance. The situation had shifted entirely, and the predators who had assumed they were in control were now at the mercy of someone who understood danger in a way they never could. Even as the confrontation unfolded, he maintained a calm that belied the intensity of the moment. There was no panic, no hesitation, no distraction. Every action flowed from training, from experience, from the innate understanding of how to protect, how to neutralize, how to survive and ensure survival for others. The attacker's confidence crumbled under the weight of his skill, their sense of inevitability replaced by shock, confusion, and the dawning realization that they had underestimated him entirely. The shift was immediate, subtle at first, but unmistakable. The attackers, who had approached with a sense of power and control, suddenly found themselves reacting instead of acting. The arrogance that had fueled their movements evaporated as they realized that the balance of power had been reversed. Each step they had taken with confidence now carried hesitation. Each gesture that had once asserted dominance became defensive, uncertain, reactive. They had assumed they were in control, that nothing could stop them, and in that assumption lay their critical vulnerability. The SEAL exploited it with precision, turning their own aggression against them in ways they could neither anticipate nor counter. He moved with a fluidity that seemed almost impossible to follow, striking with timing that left no room for recovery. Every motion was deliberate, every adjustment calculated to destabilize, distract, and disarm. He understood the psychology of fear and dominance, using their assumptions against them. Where they expected resistance, he delivered counteraction. Where they anticipated hesitation, he acted with decisiveness. The attacker's confidence shattered under the weight of skill, training, and strategy that they had not imagined possible. Each moment reinforced their growing panic as they realized that their sense of invincibility was an illusion. Their mistakes multiplied. Small errors that in ordinary circumstances might have gone unnoticed now became critical. A misstep here, an overextension there, a pause too long. Each one gave him the opening he needed to maintain control. He didn't need brute force alone. He needed leverage, precision, and timing. The SEAL's actions were a combination of instinct honed through rigorous training and a strategic mind that anticipated moves before they were even made. The attackers were caught in a web of their own making, ensnared by the very confidence that had led them into danger. Every reaction of theirs became a signal, a guide for his next move. He read their intentions in the tilt of a shoulder, the shift of weight, the tightening of a fist. Their aggression, once threatening, now revealed their vulnerability. He used it to isolate them, to separate them from each other, to create openings that allowed him to control the situation without overextending himself. The fight, once seemingly lopsided, was now a demonstration of skill, composure, and decisive action. They had assumed power, but he held mastery. The SEAL's control of the situation was psychological as well as physical. Fear began to replace arrogance. Hesitation replaced certainty. They realized that the rules they had relied on, their sense that the world would accommodate their impulses, were no longer in play. Each calculated movement from him reinforced the futility of resistance. The attackers' attempts to regain control were clumsy and disjointed, their confidence replaced by growing dread. The tables had been turned completely, and the shift was as absolute as it was sudden. In the midst of the chaos, he maintained an awareness of the woman's position, guiding her away from immediate danger even as he neutralized the threat. His actions were not about punishment alone. They were about protection, about asserting control in a way that ensured she could no longer be harmed. Every movement considered her safety, the angles of potential attack, and the environment around them. He transformed the situation from a moment of terror into one where the attackers were at his mercy, unable to dictate the outcome, stripped of the power they had assumed was theirs. The attackers' shock was palpable. Their eyes, once filled with predatory certainty, now reflected confusion, fear, and the dawning awareness of defeat. They had walked into a scenario they believed they controlled and discovered too late that control had been an illusion. Each motion they made was countered, anticipated, or neutralized, leaving them with no initiative, no advantage, no momentum. The seal had rewritten the dynamics of the encounter in real time, turning their aggression into vulnerability, their confidence into panic, and their sense of dominance into complete uncertainty. Even as he maintained control, he continued to assess the situation, ensuring that every action minimized risk and maximized safety. The transition from threat to containment was seamless, a combination of instinct, skill, and disciplined strategy. The attackers had assumed they could act with impunity, but in their hubris, they had underestimated the force of preparation, training, and decisiveness. In a matter of moments, the world had been inverted, the predators had become prey, and the power had shifted entirely. The immediate danger over, the air hung heavy with tension, charged with the adrenaline that only extreme fear and extreme action can produce. She stood there, still trembling, still catching her breath, feeling the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her chest. Every heartbeat reminded her of the moments when everything could have gone differently, the moments when the predators had assumed they had complete control. She had survived, but survival carried its own burden, a mixture of relief, disbelief, and the lingering echoes of terror. The world felt simultaneously familiar and irrevocably changed, as though the night itself had rewritten what she thought was possible. Around her, the aftermath unfolded with a strange intensity. The attackers, now subdued or fleeing, were no longer the embodiment of menace they had been moments before. Their arrogance, their sense of invulnerability, had been stripped away, leaving only the raw consequences of their actions. It was a stark lesson in the fragility of control, the impermanence of power when it is not tempered by awareness, skill, or morality. The streets, once a backdrop for potential tragedy, now bore witness to a reversal that was both shocking and undeniable. The seal's presence had changed everything, turning terror into reckoning, fear into relief, and potential tragedy into survival. For her, the emotional landscape was complex and overwhelming. Gratitude mingled with lingering fear, relief mixed with disbelief, and the echo of the attack lingered in her mind, replaying in fragments. The way they moved, the expressions on their faces, the way her own body had responded in fear and instinct. There was also a sense of empowerment, subtle but undeniable, rooted not in what she had done, but in what had been done on her behalf. Someone had acted with skill, courage, and decisiveness to ensure her safety. The stark contrast between her vulnerability and the seal's control highlighted the fragile line between danger and protection, between fear and safety, between despair and hope. The response of the seal, calm yet forceful, decisive yet controlled, left an indelible impression. It was more than just physical intervention. It was a statement, a demonstration of how preparation, training, and courage could reshape the outcome of events that had seemed unstoppable. The attack, which had begun with the attacker's assumption of absolute dominance, had been rewritten in moments by someone who understood danger and knew how to neutralize it. The contrast between the helplessness she had felt and the certainty of his actions underscored the power of expertise, decisiveness, and the willingness to act when action is needed most. There was also a profound lesson in justice. The attackers, who had assumed the night would protect them and that consequences would never arrive, faced the stark reality that actions have repercussions. The moment of reckoning was swift, unequivocal, and undeniable. In that instant, what had begun as a one-sided threat had become a demonstration of accountability. It was a moment where courage and skill intersected with morality, creating an outcome that left no room for misinterpretation. Actions that are born of entitlement and aggression are never without consequence, and the night had delivered that truth with absolute clarity. As the chaos subsided, there was a quiet intensity in the aftermath, a moment of reflection that weighed heavily on everyone involved. For her, it was the realization that survival is not just about escape, but about the presence of those who act decisively in defense of others. The seal had turned what could have been the worst night of her life into a story of intervention, protection, and survival. Every detail of the encounter, the fear, the aggression, the reversal of roles, became a memory etched into her awareness, a reminder of how quickly life can shift and how critical decisive action can be in the face of danger. In the larger sense, the event carried a message that extended beyond the immediate moment. It was a reminder that courage exists not just in the absence of fear, but in the presence of responsibility, that justice can be swift when paired with skill, and that vulnerability does not define the outcome when others are willing and able to intervene. It highlighted the stark contrast between recklessness and preparedness, between arrogance and expertise, between the assumption of control and the reality of consequences. It was a lesson that would linger long after the night ended, leaving an imprint on everyone who witnessed or understood the events that had unfolded. Even in the quiet aftermath, the implications were clear. The night had revealed the fragility of assumptions, the importance of preparedness, and the undeniable power of action when courage is paired with skill. The echoes of fear transformed into the echoes of relief. The echoes of potential harm transformed into the echoes of accountability, and the fleeting terror of one night became a story that carried with it lessons far beyond the immediate danger.